Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me. My name is Paul F. Verhoeven. The F stands for Francis. Please don't hold that against me. I'm an author, a broadcaster, entertainer, and I've actually written a book. It's called Electric Blue, and it's right behind me. It's the pink and blue one. Now, thank you so much for coming along. Obviously, at this particular time, we can't be in libraries physically. During the tour for my first book, Loose Units, I really enjoyed hopping from bookstore to bookstore and library to library, often with my dad in tow, and it was a really enjoyable journey. So I'm really sorry that we couldn't be together in person, but now this will be immortalized forever. I believe that this video will outlast any kind of nuclear apocalypse that we live through. So if you're watching this from a fallout shelter, hello, and this used to be a called a Hawaiian shirt. Where to begin? So when I was about 7 years old, I realized that my dad was a cop. He was a cop in the 80s in Sydney. He lived through some incredibly insane, awful, stressful, horrifying stuff. And obviously I grew up with a bit of a complex. I wanted to, kind of be as heroic as him. A couple of years ago, I sat him down and basically got him to talk me through what he lived through as a police officer in the roaring, terrifying, corrupt 1980s. He was stationed over at North Sydney, in fact, and I wrote a book about it. I wrote a book called Loose Units, and it's effectively The Princess Bride with guns and car chases. So it's me and Dad in the present day going through his case files and then snapping back to the 1980s when a 21-year-old John Verhoeven, my dad, was on patrol and was trying to be the best person he could be, was trying to be heroic, and was going through some pretty weird stuff. So that's Loose Units. And Loose Units was really enjoyable. It went really well. And what happened after that was Dad and I were sitting around twiddling our thumbs because the interview sessions for Loose Units kind of couldn't stop. Dad I'd let the genie out of the bottle with Dad and his stories of his time on the force. He was telling me stories of, a woman who was shorn in half under a train carriage and he had to hold her in two pieces while she passed away. He encountered a witch, he stopped jewelry heists, there were car chases, there was intrigue, and there was a love story because Dad met my mum on the force. And after 2 weeks, which if you're watching Dad, it's probably a little bit fast for that sort of thing, they got together and they got engaged and they had me. Again, very, very quick. So Loose Units became this really wonderful adventure, but we weren't done yet. So we started getting together every week and kind of just trying to recapture the magic. And we realized that Dad had all these cases that didn't make it into the first book. And so we started doing Loose Units, the podcast. And that's been, I think, 2.5, 3 years. And we've had over 2 million listens. We have listeners all over the world. We've done live shows all over Australia. And like I said, we've done appearances at libraries and bookstores. And obviously that's something that we can't be doing right now, which is a real bummer. But we do have this. So it's really nice to have you all here. Now, the reason I set up what Loose Units is because my new book, Electric Blue, is actually a sequel to Loose Units. Now, after Dad finished his time on patrol, just being a uniformed police officer, and one of the things about Dad is he's very proactive, and like me, I've been diagnosed with ADHD, in case you couldn't already tell. And one of Dad's things was he just was always pursuing work. He was very restless, and he and his partner Julian at the time would effectively go out and try and, just actively pursue work because police is a reactive industry. It's weird. You see a problem and you go and clean up. But Dad and Julian thought, what if we actually try and solve crime, solve problems? The thing is, that's not the job of a patrol officer technically. That's the job of detectives. Dad really wanted to be a detective. Now, at the end of Loose Units, and I highly recommend, if you haven't read Loose Units, to pester the library that you're watching this from and just make sure they have copies and, read Loose Units first. But at the end of Loose Units, Dad finds out that actually he kind of doesn't want to be a detective. He wants to be in forensics. Now, for anyone who's watched CSI, something like that in real life, obviously, there's far less hair product and peroxide and, crash zooms on objects. But one thing that Dad learned was that forensics was a lot more interesting than he thought. And Electric Blue is set in the mid-80s, and it's about my dad, the former patrol officer, throwing himself into the world of forensics, into the world of fingerprints, autopsies and crime scene analysis, and it's all set in the 80s. Now, one of the things that I found really interesting about writing Electric Blue was that suddenly, after having done years of work with Dad and having written the first book, I wanted to do something a lot bigger and a lot more ambitious and a lot weirder. Because one of the things that I discovered was that people really resonated with the story of Dad and I, as a father and son, coming to understand each other better. Now, I never completely understood why Dad wanted to talk me out of being a cop. And I always assumed it was due to some, deep-seated character flaw or something. I always thought it was because I wasn't good enough. Obviously, they say dress for the job you want, and as you can see from my shirt, I wanted to be a detective in Hawaii in the 80s. I just grew up worshipping, detective work and crime solving, and I never thought I had what it took, and apparently neither did Dad. So Electric Blue is sort of an exploration of Dad's time in forensics, but it's also kind of a really deep dive into what it's like to be a son who has a dad who is a hero cop who fights crime, gets into car chases, and is basically a modern day 80s style Sherlock Holmes. I am a really big fan of a whole bunch of different genres. And like I said, I have ADHD, so it's part true crime. It's definitely part true crime because it's based on completely true events and cases that did actually happen. So when you read Electric Blue, you'll actually be finding out about, some really scary stuff that went down in the 80s and crimes that you probably never even heard of that were taking place right under people's noses, all across the northern beaches, North Sydney, and in the city. But you will also find out about my journey with Dad. And it's part road movie, it's part adventure story, there's some weird fiction stuff in there. I illustrated part of the book. It's just this big, sprawling adventure story based on true events. And it's been a real whirlwind to actually write, edit, get this thing done. And I'm really excited about the prospect of all of you reading it. My influences, obviously growing up, were, as you can see from my bookshelf, there's a lot of really weird stuff here. I was really influenced by the work of Stephen King, which obviously is completely fictional, but I really like, crunchy, meaty, violent, weird, funny writing, and I hope I've managed to capture some of that for you. Now, one thing I would like to do for you now, if you're amenable and if you're, enjoying yourselves in this very virtual environment, is I would like to read a chapter for you from the book. And I hope you don't mind, I was going to read the first chapter because, it's a very good place to start. So, oh look, there's a copy right there. Here we go. So, Electric Blue, chapter 1. Also, I thought you might like to see the dedication. It is extremely stupid and my editors were very tolerant, letting me keep it in. If that's just giving you any idea of what kind of book this is. Here we go. Oh, wow. Chapter 1. Cop to it. There's blood everywhere. A murder has been carried out and only I can solve it. This, I think, is shaping up to be a really good book. I'm 11. I'm in a cavernous bookstore at Warringah Mall with my dad, John. He's an ex-cop and he's over by the thriller section. But before he wandered off to busy himself, he guided me to a shelf. This shelf right here. Then he reached up and handed me a book. The book is called Who Killed Harlow Thrombi, and much like me, it weighs almost nothing. I'm tall and lean and very bored, and I'm sad. I'm very sad, and I don't know why. Maybe Dad knows. Maybe that's why he brought me shopping. The book isn't a normal book, not like the one you're holding. Huge, delirious letters proclaim that it's a choose-your-own-adventure story. The cover is a brazen, late 70s style mishmash of tropes. The sinister gardener lurking in the corner, the big-chinned hero detective floating up near the title. And like a movie poster. It's like a movie poster, I think to myself, turning it over in my hand. A movie poster on a book. What a world. Dad is eyeing me from across the store. He's wearing an expression one wears when hoping not to startle a deer. I open the book. That heady new book smell reaching my nose almost instantly, you know the one. And I'm worried that after years of completely bouncing off the written word, this book will offer me nothing. I have ADHD, you see. My brain just sort of wanders off after a few pages whenever I try to read. I enjoy the first few pages, the promise the book holds, but then I fear that the ADHD will take control again. ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Ever tried to wrestle with ADHD? Imagine your brain, your focus, your drive, your attention as a plume of smoke. Got it? Thick, cloying, sweet smoke swirling churlishly around your head. Now, imagine someone standing in front of you. They're waving. You should probably wave back. There we go. Now you're both waving. And what's that he's holding? A big glass bottle. He's handing it to you. He's seen something shiny and run off after it. Just you and the bottle now, kid. Now, do me a favor, would you? Try to get the smoke back into the bottle. No, I'm serious. That's what ADHD is like. 11-year-old me, God, I'm adorable, looks up at Dad again. See how hopeful he is? He wants me to read the book. I can tell. He wants me to make an effort. When I was a kid, my dad was a cop. He's not a cop at this point, mind you. He's a firefighter. And as I stand there in the bookstore, walls of great works towering around me and my dad's great works practically wafting off him like a highway mirage, I wonder what it must be like for a person like him to have a kid like me. Because it's bizarre growing up with a larger-than-life father, let me tell you. Dad spent years in general duties, which just means he was a regular beat cop, in uniform, patrolling the streets and relentlessly pursuing leads. Then he headed to forensics. You know, all the really gory stuff. Corpses, fingerprints, trace evidence, digging up bodies, autopsies, snappy one-liners. A weird career path, to be sure, but Dad's a weird guy. He's walked over now, trying to act casual. So I humor him and begin to lazily peruse the book he handed me. And there, right there, on the second page is... wait. A choice. This book is going to let me choose. If my idiot brain wants to run away with itself and pursue leads, pursue what-ifs, run down forgotten alleyways, the book will actually encourage it. Unlike regular books and real life, this story in my hands encourages do-overs. I look up at Dad, wonder in my eyes. Is real police work like this? I ask, holding the tiny paperback aloft. Dad looks down at me, smiles, a smile which upon reflection is a little too sad to burden a kid with, and says, "No, mate. If I made a mistake when I was a policeman, I had to live with it." Dad takes the book from me and kind of tunes out for a moment, clearly thinking something over. I just sort of watch the guy holding the book in his hands, thinking. He looks around the store, smiles at me, and heads to the counter. He pulls out a huge leather wallet, distended from 1,000 compressed business cards crammed inside, draws out a crinkled note, smooths it, and hands it to the cashier. She rings up the purchase, and Dad hands me the book in a brown paper bag. Then we head home. Because of the unique yet exhausting way my brain works, you're going to have to keep up with my ricocheting between the present and the past. Now, it's 26 years later, and my folks live somewhere else. But it's okay, we're still home. They're home. We're currently standing outside my parents' cozy little apartment. They've lived here for a touch over a year, and it's so immaculate, so carefully curated and stacked with artisanal, minimalist pieces of design and art that you'd be forgiven for thinking you're standing in a film set. Let's head on in. You can leave your shoes on, just don't drag any mud in. We'll just head down these stairs and knock. It's okay. Don't be nervous. Dad is lovely. Weird, but lovely. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive, at least not in my family. What we're about to do, friends, is sit down with Dad and find out where I went astray, if indeed that's what I did. Why wasn't I capable of doing what he did? And why are we so different? He's a man of focus, of drive, of grit. I'm the exact opposite, and that point of difference has been eating me up, as much as I hate to admit it. So I'm here for answers. I want to find out how Dad made the hard choices and why I struggled to make even the simplest of choices. Was it the ADHD? Was it cowardice? And why did the apple fall so far from the tree? Shh. Here he comes. It's actually Mum who opens the door. Mum, actual name Christine, beams at me and envelops me in a hug. She makes an elongated, delighted "ah" sound, as if she's surprised to see me, which is impossible because I called ahead. I think what I'm discovering as I get older is that Mum is perpetually stoked to see me, which is the kind of ambient affection that really keeps the emotional engine running on the low days. She ushers me into the living room. Your father is driving me insane, Paul. Dad looks up. Currently, the hero cop, ex-hero cop, is leaning over, refusing to bend his legs, combing the tassels on a lavish Persian rug with a hairbrush. He looks up at me. Let's try that again. He looks up at me with an expression that says, I know you want me to look ashamed about this, but I'm not ashamed about this. These tassels were out of alignment, Paul. This had better not go in the fucking book, mate, Dad says aloud. Why would I put it in the book? I reply calmly, making a mental note to put it not just in the book, but right near the start of the book, so it sticks in everyone's memory. Dad places the hairbrush on a sideboard, asks me if I want anything to drink, ignores me when I tell him I'd like a whiskey sour, then sits. He picks up a leather-bound moleskine, carefully unwinding the elastic that binds the pages in place. I told Dad to take lots of notes on cases from his forensics years because they're the years he never talked about. I knew it would take him months to dredge this stuff up. And if I'm honest, his notebook is practically creaking. The damn thing is fit to burst, and I realize he's done to it what most men do to their wallets. Overstuffed it to the point where storing it in his jean pocket would give him a herniated disc. It's at this point that Dad notices the book I bought. It's gift wrapped, carefully swaddled in coarse brown paper and crisscrossed with frayed twine. I hand it to him. He weighs the package, shaking it as if it was something other than a book. Did you wrap this? He asks, eyeing the small rectangular parcel. Yes, I lie. It was, in fact, wrapped by my wife, Tegan. She has the kind of dexterous hands that were born to pick locks. Thank God she avoided committing larceny in the past, or having ex-cops for parents-in-law would be a jot awkward. Dad pulls the bow and the string cascades to either side with a soft shh. He then peels away the paper, just the top at first, and stops. Peering out from the opening is the edge of a small paperback. In a decidedly dated font, bold and hugged by a red bar, are the words, choose your own adventure. Dad pauses and smiles at me. I think I know what this is, he says. I'll get to this tonight. Is this the crime one? Yes, I answer, returning his smile. The crime one. He looks at it again, a grateful expression playing across his face. He then pops it down next to his notebook, picks the warped object up and flicks to the first page. Where do you want to start? Well, I reply, I'm trying to figure you out, Dad. And I get why I didn't end up in uniform. I'm a tremendous physical coward, but forensics is details. It's Sherlock Holmes dusting for prints, analyzing evidence. It's granular. It's perfect for me. And yet even forensics wasn't something I felt the pull to do. I need to find out why I didn't end up where you did, Dad. So let's begin at the beginning. Forensics. It's not car chases, sprinting after bad guys, arrests. It's pretty basic, right? He looks like I just farted into his drink. Buckle up, dear boy, he glowers smugly. Buckle up. And that's chapter 1 of Electric Blue. So it then sort of spirals into this journey into what it was like for Dad to be in forensics in the 1980s in Australia. But I really, really, really hope you enjoy it. If you haven't read Loose Units, do go back. If you want to listen to the Loose Units podcast, it's on iTunes. It's basically everywhere. Right now, Dad and I are going through a season dealing with his time running a funeral home in the 90s. I told you he had ADHD, like with his career, and I think his professions are proof of that. Anyway, Electric Blue, I worked extremely hard on it. I'm so proud of this big, silly, funny, violent book. And I really hope you like it. Pest your library to get as many copies as they can and to read it. And if you want, there's also an audiobook, which Dad has a cameo on. Anyway, it's been so lovely catching up with all of you, and I hope you're all enjoying your confinement, if that's even possible. Thank you so much to the library for letting me do this talk, and I hope I can visit in person soon. I'm Paul Verhoeven. See you later.